now we have someone most anticipated because Marissa has been hyping him up, kind of. We have another first-timer, Andrew Hobbs. He has been wanting to do a show about his journalist career called Bad Journalist. And then this opportunity came up and it finally gave him the kick in the pants that he needed. If you get your journalism from comedians, why not get your comedy from journalists? And as you can see, the actor that may or may not be named Tiara is now a white guy because, wow, it's so much faster and easier to change how you look like. You don't have to go outside to get a tan or avoid getting a tan anymore. So, all right, let's become... Where is my outfit for you? Let's become and let's welcome Andrew Hobbs to the stage.
Thank you very much, Tiara, and good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing very well.
Woo! I get you. There you are. I got you a little pompadour.
I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to have a pompadour. It's the avatar is significantly more fashionable than myself, I'm afraid. I'm still rocking the COVID locks.
Look, this is why we're all doing it digitally.
We all exactly. So I thought with my grey hair that I might potentially look like Henry Cavill, but unfortunately, I think I'm giving much more of a Lisa Simpson science teacher, music teacher kind of vibe, you know. So never mind. One can dream. But as I say, thank you very much for the intro. I guess I did want to call my show Bad Journalist because I am a bad journalist, and I say that because I'm not in the right role to really be considered a good journalist, and I'm not so bad that I'm good. Because there's only two ways that you can be a good journalist, right? Either you have an established employer, and there's less than 10 these days, who believes in you so much that they pay you a wage to do the journalism you want. And that requires you spending all day researching things or trying like crazy to get hold of some guy somewhere who might know something and then praying like hell that he'll tell you that something without asking for cash. Or you might be working for months on a story that goes absolutely nowhere. Or you might get everything right, only for the source of the person that you've written about to sue the pants off your employer, who may well then have to pay them out, which costs everybody money. And that's fun going back to the office when that happens. Or you work for one of those same employers, but you've already formed an opinion about everything that's ever happened or ever will happen. And you're ready to talk about it loudly and incessantly on both your own and on social media without talking to anybody else other than your makeup artist and potentially your chauffeur. Now, sadly, to get that gig, you have to be certain that your opinion lines up with that of the owner of your publication at all times, which can be a delicate juggling act. It means that eventually you may need to pen a suitably genuine letter of contrition when the outrage all gets too much. But don't worry too much about getting sued. The bosses will pay for that, and they'll call it freedom of speech. They may have to cut a few junior roles in the newsroom to pay for it, but as far as you're concerned, that's a good thing. I mean, less news, more space for your vacuous opinion. And hey, with the increased coverage, you probably get a pay rise. So sadly, I'm neither of those things. I've been a journalist for about 14 years, but it's pretty unlikely that any of you would have ever read something I've written. And if you had, you almost certainly wouldn't know who wrote it, and you probably wouldn't care. That's fine with me. But I figure that more or less that makes me a meh journalist. But I guess when you're thinking of a title for a show, I don't really think that meh journalist has much of an appeal, even for a 37-year-old man hiding behind a very good-looking avatar on a gaming or social media platform. So I confess I did the oldest journo trick in the book. I wrote a dodgy headline. Journos love to write dodgy headlines. You see, in years gone by, it was all about being a clever wordsmith, right? You'd try and make, this is what happens when you read your thing off the screen and your screen jumps ahead of you. Excuse me. Now I've lost where I am. Yeah, it was all about being a clever wordsmith. You are either putting together some clever pun or some quick slogan to jump off the page of the newspaper to whoever was buying it at the local news agency. Today, when you write for the web, it all has to be written for SEO, which is search engine optimization. Or that's whatever your reader is typing into Google or Facebook or scrolling past on Twitter or even on the news site in question. So it means that when you write for the web, you have to use as many buzzwords as possible to get people to click on the story, even if you might have radically overstated the importance of one facet of the story, and even if that headline is the only thing people would read. Please, 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 friends, I implore you, it shouldn't be never, ever, ever trust a headline. Yeah, for me, I write about farm machinery. So I write about tractors and harvesters and sprayers and the like. I guess you can get a lot of turnips that way. But when I wrote about an Australian company importing a new lineup of cultivators, a cultivator's like a plough, from the Czech Republic, I couldn't go past a snappy web headline of Seraphin looks to Europe for new deep tillage equipment. The title on the magazine? Checkmate. Get it? Get it? Czech company? Checkmate. I wrote about a Chinese wheel loader and I had the headline loaded statement. I wrote about an improved grouper bin with a new tubulator attachment and I had the headline totally tubular. And my most recent pièce de résistance, and I laughed about this for a good minute when I came up with it. It was a feed mixer, which is like a big blender for hay for cattle. And I had the headline, Amazing Graze. Oh, yeah. Okay. I told you, like, you know, I'm glad you guys said you liked bad puns because, baby, I got plenty of them. But I guess it's funny that you could never do that on an online headline. And it's part of the way that the internet's allowed us to have this whole world of creativity that we're all enjoying right now. But the way that factual media is presented is still so far behind and it gets sort of squeezed out by other groups that create easy clickbait that is done so much better by those organizations. And this has led factual media to sort of go down the path of trying to emulate that success, but it drags that media down with it. Because, I mean, honestly, I don't know if you follow the mainstream media on Twitter or things like that. Most people don't. There's nothing worse than mainstream media trying to be cool, you know, like tweets about this badass grandma or cute doggo or big chonker, like coming from the age, it's not great. Also, have you noticed that there's always some words that people use to describe women that are never used to describe men? That's a pet peeve of mine. I hate that. It is sexist, but it's implicitly sexist, and it's the kind of thing that people fall for easily. The Daily Mail's the best for this, of course. And the Daily Mail's favorite word is flaunt. Flaunt is great because you can flaunt absolutely anything from your bathers to your hairstyle, to your fingernails, to your nose job, to your kneecaps. And you can do it in any outfit, from your bathers to your bathrobe. The word that I hate the most, but despise beyond all measure, is feisty. I despise feisty. And people I discuss this with are often like, why? It's not bad. I know plenty of feisty old ladies. To which I say, yes, you do. But when have you ever heard a man described as feisty? Never. Or at least never in a positive light. Because feisty doesn't mean determined or capable or stubborn. If it did, it would be applied to men. It's applied to women. It's a feisty heroine. I looked it up on Google's dictionary because I couldn't be bothered doing anything else. Poor old Macquarie, bad luck Macquarie. But Google's dictionary describes feisty as lively, spirited, courageous, or its other meaning, touchy and aggressive. To me, it's a word that means you fight back, but you're largely ineffectual. You're like a feisty little kitten, or a naughty toddler, or a campaigning old lady. Putting it another way, a feisty woman is a Karen that you like, but hopefully without the racism. Then there's the words that mean absolutely nothing. And these are words that, again, the Daily Mail loves these words. Glowing, radiant, yummy, and sometimes even healthy, which doesn't mean that people are necessarily in good health. It means that they're health conscious. And these days, health conscious can mean the complete opposite of healthy. Just look at Pete Evans. There's nothing healthy there in body or mind. I'm currently having a bit of a dilemma at what I should do with my one and only Pete Evans cookbook. Like, should I put it in the general rubbish or should I put it in the recycling? I mean, I don't know whether it's paper or whether it's dangerous waste. Anyway, I've got to tell you, I probably wasn't always so environmentally conscious to worry about that. I write about farm machinery now, but I started out as a business reporter. But because I was a business reporter in Perth, that meant I had to write about the resources industry. I wrote about mining and I wrote about oil and gas. And for 6 years, I was a reporter and editor of newspapers, magazines, and websites that covered the ins and outs of Australia's oil and gas industry. Now, when I used to tell people I was a business journo, I used to be able to see their eyes glaze over as they looked for an opportunity to leave. And when I said I was an oil and gas journalist, people used to vary from somewhere between fundamental boredom to outright anger, because I thought I must have been some sort of stooge or some sort of defender of that industry. But really, it was my job just to report on the industry, which is how in 2011, I managed to convince my employer that he needed to fly me to Broome for a week so I could report on what was the biggest oil and gas story at the time, the proposed gas plant at James Price Point. This is a Hobbsy story, in case you were wondering. Now, long story short, Woodside, which is Australia's biggest gas company, actually Australia's biggest company, was drilling for gas off the coast of Broome. Of Western Australia, and the Western Australian government wanted to set up a processing plant that was going to be built on land. Now, their theory was that would create a lot of new jobs, right? And so it set out to find a place to build it. But the best place it could find to build it was on Aboriginal land that was subject to a native title claim. And I'm going to have to give you a warning here because this is a little bit, it's difficult hearing. It was land that was subject to a native title claim, so the government had to do a deal with the native title groups that were arguing to come into full possession of the land. Native title law is the kind of thing that takes decades to resolve. Eventually, the government spent a lot of money in legal fees to eventually win the right to get the land, to have the land, promising the native title groups that they would receive more money when this plant was built. And they did a few deals with the native title groups to get permission to use that land in the first place. Except once all this was done and all the deal completed, Woodside and Shell did a deal so they could process the gas offshore on the back of a big vessel. And that meant that the land, any land that had been cleared for nothing, and those promises couldn't be kept. One of many stories, unfortunately, like that in the oil and gas industry, and one of those things that you need reporters to report on. Anyway, I'm going to come off my soapbox and tell you the story about my decision to go to James Price Point. And I was determined to go there. If permission was available to go to James Price Point, it wasn't a native title claim in that way. You could easily visit it. And I was determined to go out to James Price Point to see this land for myself and to take some photos, because I've been writing about the whole story for ages and I didn't have any pictures. Now, I don't know if you guys know very much about the tropics. I mean, I certainly didn't. I'd actually never been I'd never really been north of Brisbane before. And my first mistake was traveling there in March. Now, see, while in Melbourne, it's just the beginning of autumn, in Broome, it's the tail end of the wet season. This is great for tourists. I mean, things are really cheap. And in Broome, it's great. It's not too hot. It's not too humid. There aren't too many tourists. And you run out of place. Plus, it's a lot cheaper. But that's because it's low season. I was told that I would need a 4-wheel drive to get to James Price Point, and I managed to hire one that was an automatic, which was important to me because even though I'm a farmer's son, I don't have a manual license. Now, the person at the tourist bureau told me, oh, look, the road's a bit wet. And I said, oh, well, it's all right. I've got a 4-wheel drive. That'll handle it. No problem. So James Price Point's about 60 kilometres north of Broome. It's really well signposted, and you go off the paved highway onto a paved road. It's about 1 kilometre of paved road, and then it gives way to dirt. And now when I say dirt, I don't mean gravel. I mean fine red dirt with thick bush on both sides and lots of depressions and potholes. No problem, I tell myself, this will be fine. So I'm driving really slowly along this road for about 5 or 6 kilometres, and I'm being passed by 4-wheel drives just heading up this road before I see the first puddle. Then I see the second puddle. Then I see a third puddle. The puddles are getting bigger. The puddles are getting wider. The puddles are getting more and more frequent. Eventually I reach a puddle that's not so much a puddle as it is a river. It's probably about 5 meters wide. And not only is it stretching out ahead of me, I can see, if I turn my head to the left and right, I can see water on both sides of the road. It's kind of becoming more marshland than it is bush. And I sort of go, this is probably too risky. So I park the car, I jump out, and I decide to leave a note. Don't worry, I'm fine. I've decided to park the car here, and I'm going to walk to James Price Point. Except then I realize I don't know anything about the area. My mobile phone's not getting reception. I don't have any water. I have no idea what's in these puddles that I'm going to walk through. So then I just add to the note. I'm like, so this is the time, this is the date. If this is worried about me, look, I just won't have gone off the road. So maybe just head up and see how I am. Yeah, it wasn't smart. It wasn't smart, friends. Anyway, I'm just walking through my first puddle when a proper four-wheel drive pulls up. And I'm talking high off the ground, radio antenna, tents and packs and everything. Now, I can't remember who's driving it, but let's call them Barry and Sheila because it makes for a better story. What are you doing? Asked Barry. So I tell him, oh, don't worry about that. Look, I'll go through the puddles first. Then you can follow behind me where I've gone and we'll get there that way. Oh, okay. All right, Barry, no problem. So the first puddle's fine. I mean, the water comes up to sort of the top of the tyres. The second puddle's fine. I mean, I can see the water sort of coming up the lower third of the door. The third puddle's fine. I can see the water sort of like lapping up on top of the windscreen. Now, before I tell you about the fourth puddle, I should explain something about four-wheel drives. Among the many accessories you can get for off-road vehicles is something that most people call a snorkel. And it's called a snorkel because that's what it looks like, and that's basically what it does. Basically, it's an air intake that has its collection point above the door of the four-wheel drive. And what it's for is to get air into the engine, even if you're going through the water. So the car can keep moving because the car needs an air intake. But if you don't have the air, if it doesn't have access to air, you will quite literally flood the engine. Yeah, so I didn't know that. And my four-wheel drive didn't have one. So in the middle of the fourth puddle, my engine splutters and dies. It does not restart. I am stuck in the middle of a puddle with Barry and Sheila a good way ahead. Now, happily, Barry and Sheila are very much the generous types. So Barry, of course, has a tow rope and he manages to tow me out of the puddle. Sheila offers me a bottle of ice cold water that she's packed for the trip, and I jump into their dual cab four-wheel drive to proceed to James Price Point. Except when we get to puddle number 8 and Barry decides that even that's too much. So we return to my abandoned four-wheel drive, which of course now needs to be towed, which means I need to steer through the potholes, through the puddles, going faster than being towed back than I'd ever had the courage to drive there in the first place. We get to a different turnoff, Barry unhooks the car, we go along the back way up to the coast where Barry points at a speck in the distance along the coast. Click, that's James Price Point. I'm sorry, we can't get any nearer. Oh, that's fine, I say. So I take as many photos as I can on my little camera, which is an HP camera. And if you've ever heard of an HP camera before, they were lousy at the time and they're lousier now. We get back, I get to the car, and Barry tows me all the way back to the car hire place where I've hired the car from that morning, right? Uh-oh. Now I'm going back to a car hire place having fundamentally destroyed the car. And even though it's not the best car in the world, it is a hire car, and that means big money, right? Now, how the hell am I going to explain this to the small business that I've hired it from? Ooh. So, anyway, I arrive in style. I'm being towed by this giant Land Rover, and I see the owner, and we'll call him Barry too. He sees me coming, and he sort of raises an eyebrow, and I'm going, oh boy. So I'm ready for myself for a conversation when out jumps Barry 1. Barry, how you going? Oh yeah, all right. Blah 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 blah. Look, they say country men don't talk, but when they see each other, they really do. They start talking like the old mates they are, and I find no one wants to talk to me at all. No one except Sheila too, who takes me into the office to sort out the paperwork for the Camry I'd hired for the next 2 days. She says, you didn't want another four-wheel drive, did you? No, I'm fine. So I get in that Camry and I get the fuck out of there. 2 days later, I come back, I hand over the Camry, and I seal myself that discussion with Barry too. Yeah, doesn't have a snorkel on it. I know, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to charge you $50. You didn't put petrol in it. Oh, that's okay. Oh, no, sorry. Oh, well, I did manage to get it going again. But, if you're with budget, you've probably been charged a fair bit of money for this. I know, which is why I recommend that car hire place to anyone who ever visits Broome. Topless car rentals. When you're in Broome, go topless. Now, friends, that's a good headline. Thank you very much and have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here tonight.
Woo!
Amazing.
All right.
That was so great.
Thank you. All right.